Yo, what is up, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video. The Utah Jazz just got eliminated last night by the Dallas Mavericks in the first round of this year's playoffs, and after last year being a 1 seed and falling short, and the year before falling short, and the year before that falling short, I think everyone kind of feels like the Jazz need to make some big move. There's been rumors for a while that Gobert and Mitchell are unhappy playing together. Whether or not those have validity, I'm not sure, but there are rumors that have existed. Quinn Snyder, there's questions about, is he the coach to lead this team going forward? The role players are deteriorating around them, and it felt like last year the Jazz kind of hit their peak. I've gone on record multiple times with saying that, to me, last year was Utah's best chance at winning a championship with this core, with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert as their two best players in this supporting cast. Being a 1 seed, injuries to the Clippers, Lakers not there, that was their best shot, and they squandered it. They lost to a Clippers team that didn't have Kawhi Leonard after the first couple games, and it was a bad loss. They blew a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets. This Jazz team just really does not have the juice. And now that you've got teams like the Mavericks, you've got the Pelicans, who are a team that is kind of up and coming. You've got the Phoenix Suns, of course, being a powerhouse. The Nuggets are going to be back when they're healthy. They're going to be better. The Grizzlies have made a huge jump. The Warriors. There are so many teams that are going to become better than this Jazz team in the coming years. The Timberwolves could pass them as well. They have a ton of young talent, not to mention a bunch of the rebuilding teams that could catch up with them eventually. The Jazz are on the way out. This Jazz core is not going to be able to win a championship. They're just not there. They're not good enough. And so I think everyone kind of agrees that something needs to happen. But the more that I think about like what could happen or what the Jazz should do, the more I'm confused and the more I don't know what's going to happen. So obviously the big thing is a lot of people believe it is time to split up Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. And if you ask most people, I'm sure they would say that you should trade Gobert because, of course, Donovan Mitchell is this younger player. He's their most people consider him kind of the star of the team. Gobert and Mitchell both have 4 years left on their contract, so it's not a matter of contract. But Gobert is making more money. He's making $38 million next season, $41 million the year after, then $44 million, and then a player option with $46.6 million. While Donovan Mitchell's making $30, $32.5, $34.8, and $37 million over the next 4 years with a player option on that fourth year. So they both have 4 years, but Gobert's making more money, and so Mitchell is on a kind of a cheaper contract. And if he continues to get better, like he definitely can, then that contract could end up being really good value-wise down the line. And of course, Mitchell being the younger player, there's a chance that Gobert regresses and it makes his contract worse. So if you ask most people, Gobert is the guy you would trade. But the problem is, even if you trade Gobert, do you get enough to put around Mitchell to make a championship team? And that's just a genuine question because I don't really know the answer to that. The problem with Gobert is that his contract is really big. I think Gobert is really good. He's one of the best defensive players we've seen in a while. He's one of the best rim protectors really ever. When you look at the stats, having multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards, he is no joke an incredible player. Of course, he does have his offensive limitations, which kind of comes back to his contract. He's going to be making almost $50 million in his mid-30s, which for a guy that already doesn't have a lot of offensive game is a bit worrying, and if he deteriorates and becomes a little bit slower defensively, he loses a lot of value pretty quickly if he starts to go down. But right now, he is still a really, really good player. So if you've got a team that wants to trade for him, I don't know how much they're going to have to give up, because I'm sure teams aren't going to be willing to throw in a bunch of young assets to bring in Gobert, a guy who is making this huge contract and could deteriorate pretty quickly in a couple of seasons. Of course, he's really good now, but, they're not going to trade like their top prospects. And even then, the Jazz really probably don't want that. They don't want all these young players unless they're going to a third team, which is maybe an option they could consider, where one team gets a couple young players, another team gets Gobert, and the Jazz get some win-now role players. But even then, you're not going to get a secondary star for Donovan Mitchell in this Gobert trade. I just don't think it happens, because if a team's trading for Gobert, they're trading for him to win a championship. You're not going to get like a team with a disgruntled star trading for Gobert, giving up their star. It's not going to happen. And even then, like, the Jazz already don't have a center. Hassan Whiteside's their backup right now. So it's just a question of, what are you really going to get for Gobert that helps you build a championship team? And when there's rumors that Donovan Mitchell might be interested in like the Heat or the Knicks, maybe like a bigger market at some point later in his career, you can't waste time of bringing in younger players, waiting for them to develop and seeing the way that that goes, because you can't risk Donovan Mitchell getting mad. If that's something that you can sell him on, like, hey, stick around for a little bit, let these young guys develop, and then maybe, but even then, I really don't think you're going to get a young star. So unless Donovan Mitchell's willing to tank for a couple seasons and then rebuild this thing, you're in a weird spot with trading Gobert. So now you look at trading Mitchell. Mitchell, you could get a lot more from him. You could bring in more young pieces. You could maybe get a better player, but even then you don't have a star. And I don't think Gobert wants to tank either. Gobert said in an interview today, I think it was with The Athletic, that he wants to be a Jazz for life. He would love to retire with the Jazz, but is Gobert going to just chill and be on a tanking, rebuilding team for a few seasons? I don't know if he is. So it's really a big dilemma. And now the other kind of camp is, can you continue to build this roster around those two guys? If Mitchell and Gobert are willing to work this thing out, stay in Utah and try and figure out what's going on here, how can you rebuild this team around them? And the problem is, it's going to be really hard to make a team that you can make the team better, but can you make it better to the point where you're winning a championship? And I really don't know if you can, because the salaries you have to try and bring in like a third star, which might be what they need, or even just decent defensive role players. You've got Mike Conley, who's making $22 million this year and then $24 million next year, and he wasn't great this year. After being an all-star last season, he had a down year, and it's very clear that he's continuing to regress, which is understandable. He's like 33, 34 years old. He wasn't going to be great forever, but he's a guy that is making a good chunk of money for them. So between those three guys already, you've got like $90 million wrapped up in those guys. Then you throw in Bojan Bogdanovic, who's making $19 million next year. He is an expiring contract, so maybe a team would be willing to take him on as an expiring deal if they're looking to clear salary cap, but I don't think you're going to get much of a deal there. Bojan he wasn't great this season. He was fine, but he wasn't great. He wasn't as good as they needed him to be. You've got Jordan Clarkson, who's making $13 million this year and then $14 million next year. So all in all, between those guys and a couple of like other role players like Royce O'Neal, who's making $9 million, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, if they pick up his team option, they have absolutely no cap space. They have $154 million are wrapped up in the guys that are on the roster next season. That is already an insane price to pay for a roster that was fine, but it's not a championship caliber team. So they don't have salary cap to go out and bring in free agents. They don't really have a lot of attractive like veterans to trade, like to match salaries for a third star, and they don't have the young talent to either develop or upgrade the roster with. A lot of teams have like a couple really good young players that maybe they could deal to sweeten a package. Maybe you could throw in like Bojan Bogdanovic as an expiring contract to clear up cap space for a team, but then you could also throw in like a young player and make like, sweeten that deal a little bit, which maybe they could pull off. But their young talent isn't great. They really don't have that star piece that a team might be looking for. They've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who I think has some potential, but over this course of like these past couple seasons, when he's got an opportunity, he really hasn't taken huge advantage of it. He hasn't been phenomenal. Of course, he's still plenty young, and he's shown a lot of flashes, so maybe a team bites on that. But over the course of like around the trade deadline, he was kind of just traded as like a throw-in piece. Like he really wasn't valued that much in the trades that he was involved in. So I'm not quite sure, like with the CJ McCollum trade, he was kind of just in there, and then the Trailblazers kind of just gave him up to the Jazz. You've got Udoka Azubuike, who hasn't really shown much, Eric Pascal, who's not much more than a role player, Jared Butler, who has hardly gotten the chance to play, Trent Forrest. Those are like their guys under 25 years old. That's pretty much it. And so they don't have the young pieces to really upgrade this roster. And none of those guys are going to become like a breakout star next season that helps kind of elevate them on a cheap deal. So they're in this weird spot where you could trade Gobert, but are you going to get enough back to contend, or are you going to have to sell Mitchell on a rebuild? And will he even be willing to be part of that? 2, you could trade Mitchell and try and, build around Gobert as your defensive player of the year. They're anchored down low, but how much are you going to get back from Mitchell? And do you get back a good enough player to compete now? Or are you going to have to rebuild? And then what does Gobert think about that? 3, you could try and upgrade the roster on the peripherals, but they've tried to do that for a few years now, and it hasn't worked. Of course, they haven't made a drastic move, but even then, I don't know if they have the pieces, unless they're willing to throw in like a Bojan, a Clarkson, and then like a couple young players and draft picks to try and make a run for a star. But even then, I don't think that package is going to be enough for a team. I think there are so many better offers that teams are going to get if they have a disgruntled star. And then you've got the problem of Quinn Snyder. him being their coach for the past few years, there's questions of, is he the coach to lead them to where they need to go? And there's been rumors that the Lakers are really interested, as well as some other teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if Quinn Snyder's gone. In his exit interview after the game, he said something along the lines of like, it has been a pleasure to coach these guys. And I don't know if that's just indicating really big changes in the roster or in him no longer being the coach of the team. But with the underperformance in the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised if he's gone, and maybe they bring in another coach that really kind of just shifts this whole thing. But I still believe Quinn Snyder's a fine coach. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I do think he still has the potential to be a pretty good coach. I just don't think this roster is really that good. They lack all perimeter defense. They didn't perform in the playoffs. That's kind of just been a theme with them. They've got to make some big moves, but I really don't know the way they go. So to me, the Utah Jazz are kind of stuck right now. I'm really curious to see what they do though, because to me, they have the potential to be one of the biggest shifting forces in the league. Gobert and Mitchell are two highly impactful players, and if one or both, I didn't even mention the possibility of trading both of them. You could just trade both of them and blow this thing up completely, which honestly might be the best option, to just kind of cut your losses, blow this whole thing up. Between Mitchell and Gobert, I'm sure you could bring in like some decent role players that maybe you could flip then later at the deadline, as well as some young assets probably for Mitchell. Maybe you could deal Bojan Bogdanovic, who is an expiring contract, to a contending team that would be willing to pay him that money for like a decent young player or something like that. Clarkson, like there are pieces on this team that I think could benefit other teams, but right now they're not working together. So who knows what the Jazz are going to do? Maybe it is time to blow this thing up in full. If you ask me, I think they've got to do something. Either Mitchell or Gobert probably needs to be moved, because I don't think there's enough talent on this roster to win a championship, obviously, but not even enough to really upgrade the roster in the way that you might want to. The young talent's not going to develop in the way that they probably need to. So the Jazz need to go all in. They have to make a decision. Are you going to keep this thing going? Or are you going to blow it up? And you need to decide now, because if you keep going, you give Mitchell the chance to request out, Gobert the chance to request out, even though I think Mitchell's more likely than Gobert to demand a trade. You run the risk of them just publicly being like on the trade market, and then their value deteriorates even more. It's a whole thing. So let me know what you think the Jazz should do. I am really curious as to what you'll have to say. To me, this is one of the most interesting situations in the entire league. So I'm really curious as to what you'll have to say in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comment section below as well. Also leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy. It helps me out a ton. Of course, as I've been saying, we're trying to hit 10K before the end of the playoffs, and if y'all subscribe, it goes a really long way. So I appreciate you. Yeah, so that's what's next for the Utah Jazz. Let me know in the I don't know why I was going to say that again. I appreciate y'all watching. I see y'all later. Real one, say it back.